People didn't really know what President Putin's thoughts were, but I think I can say with great confidence he wants to see it ended also. That's good.
Do you oppose NATO membership for Ukraine?
I don't think it's practical to have it. Long before President Putin, they said there's no way they'd allow that. This has been going on for many, many years. They've been saying that for a long time, that Ukraine cannot go into NATO.
Quiet part out loud. Putin will never allow Ukraine to join NATO, as he shouldn't. I mean, guys, America was never serious about Ukraine joining NATO. Other NATO nations were never serious about allowing Ukraine to join NATO. This is something that I've repeatedly talked about over and over again. We have our not DEI but DUI secretary, or DUI hire, Secretary of Defense. Let's take a look.
Is speaking. Let's listen.
As the war approaches its 3rd anniversary, our message is clear. The bloodshed must stop, and this war must end. We want, like you, a sovereign and prosperous Ukraine. But we must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. A durable peace for Ukraine must include robust security guarantees to ensure that the war will not begin again. That said, the United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. Instead, any security guarantee must be backed by capable European and non-European troops. If these troops are deployed as peacekeepers to Ukraine at any point, they should be deployed as part of a non-NATO mission, and they should not be covered under Article 5. There also must be robust international oversight of the line of contact. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Finally, for all the haters in the chat, admit Hassan was right. They're never going to admit that. This was an inevitability because what determines the outcome of Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine was always going to be what happens on the ground in the battlefield. For America, this was an advantageous position. They did not want Ukraine to fall into the sphere of Russian influence, as Russia obviously made many, I wouldn't say demands, I guess, but like Russia definitely was invested in controlling Ukrainian politics, and Ukraine was consistently trapped between Russian sphere of influence and Western sphere of influence. In terms of the Western, you thought Russia wouldn't invade Ukraine? Yeah, because I thought it would be a devastating predicament for all parties involved. I admitted I was wrong instantly. I even apologized for it. What are you talking about? Now, listen, America's interest in Ukraine always was the same interest that we've had elsewhere: extraction of natural resources and forcing the government to basically privatize whatever key sectors they still controlled or regulated, and buy it or forcibly sell it off to foreign investment for pennies on the dollar. Do you think Ukraine is in a worse position now that Syria has fallen? No, I think that Russia is in a worse position now that Syria has fallen, which sets the stage for Russia to concede on certain things. Syria was an important asset for, it was basically a Russian naval base, like a warm water naval base for Russia. That was the reason why Russia offered protection to the Assad regime. How does Russia having a naval base in Syria even help them at all? I mean, Russia's climate is ultimately very cold. They needed, obviously, Sevastopol for entry point into the Black Sea, which is why they always retain Sevastopol in Crimea. But outside of that, you need warmer naval bases to do upkeep and maintenance. It's also probably helpful for all of the Wagner operations or any kind of naval operations you do in the African continent too. Ultimately, Donald Trump, once again, did exactly what he has done so far. American foreign policy is uniparty. Donald Trump basically just says the quiet part out loud, where he said, yeah, we're going to continue defending Ukraine, but we want this to, come to an end. And in terms of like all of our defense that we've given to Ukraine thus far, we want your natural resources. You have $500 billion worth of natural resources that we want. The only difference between Donald Trump versus any other Democratic leadership is that Donald Trump basically says the quiet part out loud. One evidence to this is the continuation of the Trump era, the first Trump era policy with NATO. Donald Trump, much criticism was made of Donald Trump undermining the NATO allegiances. All he said was European allies are going to give more of their own funds and beef up their own personal defense industries and pay more into NATO than what they do currently. What did Joe Biden do? He continued that policy. So clearly, it was not that big of an issue for the Democratic leadership. If it was, they would have reversed that decision. They never did. Donald Trump is back again, demanding more from European partners. It's like in times where I guess the mafia is experiencing an economic downturn and their protection racket, they go back to the storefronts that they're quote unquote defending and turn around and say, you got to give me more money now. You got to give me more money now. You got to buy from my own providers even more now. It's a shakedown. It's not actually supposed to destroy NATO. Donald Trump is not an anti-imperialist or whatever. He's not anti-NATO. He can't be anti-NATO. NATO is very important for American global dominance, but also on top of that, NATO is very important for the military-industrial complex. Would Zelensky even agree to any deal that doesn't offer future security, such as joining NATO? Yeah, dude, yes. What do you mean? I tried to explain this for the past 3 years to a lot of chatters who did not understand what I was saying whenever I said, Ukraine has no choice in this matter. Autonomy for Ukrainians is simply a thing that the Democratic Party presented in an effort to say, no, we're doing this for Ukraine. When the real reasons why they were doing this, beefing up support for Ukraine, was not because of the morality of the situation, although Ukrainians are on the right side, okay, morally. They are the ones that are invaded, obviously, and it's understandable to not want to be invaded. The American government's interest in Ukraine had nothing to do with morals. The American government does not operate on a moral boundary. America's interests in Ukraine were, as Trump has also correctly pointed to, openly pointed to, natural resources, extraction of natural resources, and also the privatization of government sectors that can be sold off to foreign capital. And they have done that already. And also, simultaneously, while they're doing that, that is what they always wanted. But beyond that, they also wanted to use Ukraine as a fantastic opportunity to undermine a foreign adversary's military while dumping off old refurbished weapon systems, while also testing new weapon systems in a battlefield, okay, for improving their procurement strategies so that the military-industrial complex could turn around and say, hey, we need more money. Look at our munitions. We're depleted. It's a win-win-win for American military-industrial complex and American profiteers in general. The people that obviously lose are the Ukrainian population, as always. And it's not like this was hidden. They openly stated it. Both Elizabeth Warren and Lindsey Graham have time and time again routinely admitted that Ukraine was incredibly beneficial for American interests. For 5% of our military budget, we were able to undermine the foreign adversary's military by 50% without a single American soldier dying in the process. I'd say that's a good bargain. That's what Lindsey Graham said in between talking about Israel.
You're talking about, to be clear, a supplemental bigger than $24 billion for Ukraine, and that's going to pass bigger in 45 days.
Oh, absolutely. You know why? Because we need it. We haven't lost one soldier in the Ukraine. We spent less than 5% of our military budget. 50% of the Russian army has been destroyed by the Ukrainians. They would be at Crimea already if the administration hadn't been so slow in giving weapons.
Is helping Ukraine in military capacity, sending weapons, etc., the wrong move? We're talking about the interests of the Ukrainian people. I feel like it's better to just not be involved in a war as another country. Wait, what? Dude, if the goal is not to actually free Ukraine from Russian invasion, if the goal is to just simply keep dumping weapons until it gets to a point where Ukraine can no longer fight back because they just simply don't have the manpower, and also you're slow releasing those weapons anyway, in a way where you are allowing the Ukrainian military to atrophy throughout this process in the meat grinder where they're doing trench warfare, then you're never going to say to Zelensky that they need to actually nip this in the bud and to come to the table and get to an agreement. That's where the ultimate purpose of, or the ultimate goals of America matter most.
Let's just remind you of our breaking news this evening and in the past half an hour, Donald Trump has confirmed he's had a phone call with President Putin in which they discussed the war in Ukraine. Let's speak now to our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Ben.
Like, the only reason why this is quote unquote coming to a close, and I don't know what will actually end up happening, that finalization is inevitable due to the battlefield. Isn't Ukrainian society full of Nazis? Why should we care what happens to the country? No, that is not the case. And holy shit, dude. Jesus Christ. Are you a Russian propagandist? Like, what are you talking about? The denazification argument was never actually a real one. That was never an argument that I entertained. Are you watching my fucking haters and thinking that that is my perspective? If you want to understand what I think will happen in Ukrainian politics in general, I think that things are going to get much worse. I think that Zelensky will probably be seen as an ineffective leader that sold off the country, and that much more rabid ultranationalists will inevitably seize control over the entirety of the nation, and that Ukraine will be infinitely more right-wing than it was in this process. He might even get assassinated. Something that I mentioned time and time again in the buildup to Russia invading Ukraine, something that I kept mentioning over and over again was how ridiculous the denazification argument was, okay? Every country has Nazis in their military. Every single one. This is not a real argument. You can't be like, oh, we got to denazify. That's why we have to invade. You want to know why? As I stated time and time again, when you actually invade a country whose entire national mythos is built around not being a part of the country that is invading the country, Russia, whether it be the USSR or not, then yeah, all of the most rugged, all of the worst Nazis are now going to be seen as liberators. You actually never denazify a country by invading them. You Nazify the country by invading them. So yes, of course, the country, after being invaded, is inevitably going to become more right-wing and more reactionary. All right. Let's get to some of the analysis. Let's talk about what's going on, and it'll give you more of my thoughts on this issue.
Yes, they have confirmed that this call has taken place, which is the first time they have confirmed there has been any kind of concrete contact between the two sides. And it is from the Kremlin that we've heard that the call lasted nearly an hour and a half, which is really quite significant. The statement has come from the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov. He has said a phone call between President Putin and US President Donald Trump has recently concluded. It was a very long telephone conversation. It lasted almost an hour and a half. He said that they discussed a number of topics. Now, on the key topic of Ukraine and peace negotiations, Mr. Peskov said that President Trump spoke in favor of the rapid cessation of hostilities and the solution of problems through peaceful means. President Putin, for his part, mentioned the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and agreed with Trump that a long-term settlement can be achieved through peaceful negotiations. I think one thing that really sticks out in this statement, I'm just reading it for the first time now, at the bottom it says, the Russian president invited the US president to visit Moscow and expressed readiness to receive American officials in Russia regarding areas of mutual interest, including...
I will once again reiterate the position that I maintained throughout the entirety of the Biden administration. The notion that you would never actually talk to Vladimir Putin, the notion that you would never actually force Vladimir Putin and China to the negotiation table was a idiotic one. And it was also a lie anyway. They literally did negotiate with Vladimir Putin when they talked about hostages. They literally did that. The idea that they were never going to talk to Vladimir Putin because they're evil, and Vladimir Putin is evil, all right? Make no mistake. I'm not saying he's a good guy at all. But the idea that they were never going to come to the table and have a conversation was insane. Foreign policy demon, by the way. Mr. Foreign Policy. So awesome. But what do you want the West to do, though? I get their motives are crooked. So what then? I mean, there are multiple different exit ramps that could have been enforced time and time again before coming into any sort of invasion, whether it be the continuation of the Minsk agreements and the enforcement of the Minsk agreements with a unilateral commission designed to make sure that the Minsk agreements were actually being followed through. That would have been great. That would have been incredible. That would have been the number one thing to do. When you think about, when you go all the way back to the Minsk agreements, when you go all the way back to that, and you think about what Russia was stating in the Minsk agreements, that seems like a fantastic opportunity. Now it seems like it would never happen, because that would mean all of the annexed land that Russia took over in eastern Ukraine would be given back to Ukraine, and that LPR and DPR would be seen as autonomous regions that are still firmly within the Ukrainian national boundary, that would still allow Russia to have interference in Ukrainian political affairs. That was the major reason as to why the Ukrainian side, or the Western interests in terms of like following the Minsk agreements, never held up, because they were like, that's ridiculous. We don't want that shit, because then that would mean Russia has influence over Ukrainian politics. That's under the impression that Russians actually wanted Minsk to hold. It's a failure that was needed pretext of further capturing Ukrainian territory, which Putin sees all of it as his. Yes, this part is correct. Putin does see all of Ukraine as his. But there's two different ways of going about it. And the other way that they were trying to go about this was to maintain influence within Ukrainian politics and bring Ukraine into the sphere of Russian influence as a border state that still creates a buffer zone between NATO and Russia. Then, once Russia invaded Ukraine and went all the way to Kyiv and got pushed back due to a lot of support and a lot of defense from Western nations, NATO nations specifically, pushing back gave Zelensky some time to bargain and some leverage. Then the 15-point Antalya plan came through in that process. That negotiation was the highest level of leverage that Ukraine had. And their leverage since then has only diminished as Russian forces have been able to successfully push further and further into eastern Ukrainian territory and forcibly annexed and mined the entirety of the territory and hardened their defenses in the entirety of the territory that they took over. At that point, that was an exit ramp. And I gave credit to Zelensky as well in terms of the way that he wanted to bargain. The problem is, what happens when you run out of people? The dynamic between Israel, Palestine versus Russia and Ukraine have a lot of similarities. Russia is an irredentist force that is forcibly taking over land and violating the sovereignty of a nation state. Israel is the settler colony that is dominating the indigenous population. But one key aspect of this is that we control all the cards in terms of what Israel can and can't do. We do not control all the cards in terms of what Russia can and can't do. All we can do is try to force Russia to incur penalties for invading Ukraine. So the negotiation process is entirely different. That's simply my position. We can tell Israel to stop tomorrow and they would be forced to stop. We can't tell Russia to stop because Russia is a foreign adversary. Its entire economy and its entire statehood relies on being outside of the American sphere of influence. There's still leverage, and America has pulled on those points of leverage to the best of their ability. But of course, we don't have the same level of control over Russia as we do over Israel.
Annexed Crimea, the last...
Nah, you only defend Russia because you're a communist like Putin? Yeah, exactly. Vladimir Putin is definitely a communist and not an authoritarian kleptocrat who is very much a capitalist, and that, yeah, I'm certainly defending Vladimir Putin.
Sticks out for me.
What should the West do? Force every party involved in this, including China, to the negotiations table and set up a treaty for permanent security. That's what America should have done from the jump. We didn't want that at all. A treaty with Russia? Yeah, okay, bro, that's useful. I will never stop maintaining the position that all wars end with treaties. I've maintained the position over and over again that even if Russia were to not follow through on their side of the bargain, you're still back to square one. You're still in a defensive posture. You still engage in military action, but that's what you've been doing anyway.
Yeah, for Vladimir Putin, according to him, the root causes of this conflict is not Russia invading Ukraine. It's not Moscow's aggression. He has always claimed in the last 3 years that it's NATO's fault. It's NATO's historical eastward expansion that forced Russia's hand in his terms, to fight a defensive war. That's how it's portrayed here, and it has been for the last 3 years. They've built this narrative around the war to claim that the West is the aggressor, Russia is the innocent victim here. I think this is really interesting, actually, because when Vladimir Putin launched this so-called special military operation, which is how the war in Ukraine is still called here in Moscow, it's still presented as that, it's not called a war, it was supposed to be over in a matter of weeks, of course. It was supposed to be an outright victory. Peace negotiations, a negotiated settlement, is not how it was supposed to end, and yet that is not how it's being portrayed here in Russia. It's very much still being presented as that victory will be Russia's. You see all around Moscow these big signs saying victory will be ours, but I think no matter what kind of concessions, they will want to spin it as a victory over Ukraine.
Yes, both sides will spin their end of the bargain as a major W. Of course, this is politics. Russia will be like, oh my God, we did a amazing job. We killed so many people. So many of our people died for the grayest land that is now also mined into oblivion anyway. It's like unusable farmland, but it's fantastic. It's a great W for us. Of course they're going to say that.
Over the collective West, and you get a sense of that from that statement there, that Vladimir Putin is minded to, for his part, to eliminate the root causes of the conflict, and agreed with Trump that a long-term settlement can be achieved. He seems to be conflating these two ideas, that a long-term settlement will mean a victory for Russia because he's got NATO to back off. A very important point to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, this is also another aspect of this. It's so funny how Russia is claiming they got NATO to back off when 2 new countries joined NATO. Previously, those 2 countries had a neutrality handshake agreement. Now they're a part of NATO. And on top of that, it's not like Ukraine was ever going to join NATO anyway, in the eyes of the NATO nations, which is a reality that they mentioned time and time again, even though a lot of people refuse to reckon with that reality. So ultimately, this wasn't a massive W for Russia at all. Russia was able to basically deliver a gift to America in terms of how multipolarity is actually a devastating bargain for many of the countries that are currently under the security blanket of the United States of America. They reaffirmed their position to American empire and American dominance, while also simultaneously showing that they didn't have the military capabilities of overtaking Ukraine. So they showcased themselves as a paper tiger simultaneously, while showing the rest of the world that it's awesome to be under the security blanket of the United States of America. In my estimation, you gave a lifeline to American security operations by at least another decade, if not 2 decades. That's the same thing you said at the time before they invaded. Yes, I did say this before they invaded as well, but it didn't matter. Nobody listens to any of the... You can pick apart what I'm saying and present it as though I'm arguing for the exact opposite position that I'm arguing for. As I realized when I saw brief snippets of like the Willie Mack show and many other Hasan Loves Russia videos that were made at the time, I was wondering why the people thought that I was pro-Russia. It turns out it's because they clipped my argument that I was making against Russia and presented it as though I was pro-Russia. Anyway, Trump is live taking questions. Let's take a look.
With Vladimir Putin, and were there any preconditions set to agree to this meeting?
No, we had a great call, and it lasted for a long time, over an hour this morning. I also had with President Zelensky a very good call after that. And I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace, and President Zelensky wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed. We're very far away from that particular war, but that's a vicious war. Probably 1.5 million soldiers killed in a short period of time. I've never seen anything. I have pictures that are, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe what you have to look at. Young, beautiful soldiers that are just being decimated. And it would be nice to end it immediately. But we had a very good talk with, people didn't really know what President Putin's thoughts were, but I think I can say with great confidence he wants to see it ended also. That's good. And we're going to work toward getting it ended, and as fast as possible. It's It's a horrible situation going over. It's flat land, and the bullet goes off, and the only thing it can hit is a body, a human body, a young human body. And they're losing just tremendous numbers of mostly soldiers. Just the cities and
he loves
towns
that line.
have been largely demolished.
He thinks it's poetic.
It's a shame what's happened to that country. It would have never happened if I were president. That I can tell you. Would have never happened. It's to look at that. And October 7th would have never happened either, by the way, the Middle East. But we'll get it. I think we'll get it. We'll get something done. We're going to be meeting actually tomorrow. They're meeting in Munich, as you know, and we're going to have some other meetings. And I'll be dealing with President Putin largely on the phone, and we ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here, and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster.
It sounds like that would just be a meeting between you and Putin and perhaps the Crown Prince, but not President Zelensky.
Probably we'll have a first meeting, and then we'll see what we can do about the second meeting.
Also commit to go to Ukraine?
What about Ukraine?
Did you commit to go to Ukraine?
No, I haven't. I haven't committed to go to Ukraine. I would think about going. Yeah, I'd think about it. No problem.
You say today, Mr. President, that they received your vision. What is your plan to end this war? Like today, Secretary.
Well, I'm not going to tell you my plan. I can just tell you we've made a lot of progress. This
He won't tell you his plan
by Biden, not by me, because this has been going on for now a long time, years, and it should have been done by Biden.
Oppose NATO membership for Ukraine?
I don't think it's practical to have it, personally. I know that our new Secretary of Defense, who's excellent, Pete, made a statement today saying that he thinks it's unlikely or impractical. I think probably that's true. I think long before President Putin, they said there's no way they'd allow that. This has been going on for many, many years. They've been saying that for a long time, that Ukraine cannot go into NATO. And I'm okay with that. I just want the war, whether they are or they're not. But it certainly would seem to be that most people have said that is something that's
part
not going to happen.
out loud.
Would you support Zelensky ceding territory or exchanging territory in any agreement to end the war?
Well, he's going to have to do what he has to do, but, you know, his poll numbers aren't particularly great, to put it mildly. He's got a country where, you know, it's been savaged and attacked, and he's got an army that's been very, very brave, actually, despite the fact that, you know, we've given him, in my opinion, $350 billion. That's what the real number is. You don't hear that number. And Europe has given, in my opinion, $100 billion. And they've done it in the form of a loan. And I have a Secretary of Treasury right now who's actually quite brave. He's over in Ukraine on a train. And there's a lot of things happening around that train that aren't so good. And he's going there to get a document done where we're going to be assured that we're going to, in some form, get this money back, because we're putting up far more money than Europe, and Europe is in far more danger than we are. We have an ocean in between. Europe has nothing in between. You know, they have in between, they have Ukraine in between. So wait a minute. So as you know, Europe is putting up money, and they're getting it in the form of a loan. And the United States under Biden didn't do loans. They just handed money every time somebody walked in from Ukraine. They just handed them money foolishly. This should have never happened. It should have never started. And once it did, other things should have happened. Other things should have taken place. So we're getting security on our money. We're going to have it secured by, they have rare earth, and they have oil and gas, and they have a lot of other things. And we're asking for security on our money. They've agreed to it. Ukraine has agreed to it.
Does that mean you are not sending any more aid to Ukraine?
No, we are, but we want it secured, and the money is going to be secured.
When would the U.S. stop sending funding? When would the U.S. stop sending funding?
Because if we didn't do that, then Putin would say he won. We're the thing that's holding it back. And frankly, we'll go as long as we have to go, because we're not going to let the other happen. But President Putin wants to have peace now, and that's good. And he didn't want to have peace with Biden.
All right, let's get back to the not so great state of affairs in the United States of America, and specifically with respect to Ukraine.
To further enable effective diplomacy and drive down energy prices that fund the Russian war machine, President Trump is unleashing American energy production and encouraging other nations to do the same.
That argument ignores the fact that we waited until Ukraine couldn't fight back anymore, thus having to accept any deal they get. No, that's not true. The real reason why we waited until Ukraine couldn't fight back anymore is because there's no more weapons that you can send if people that are holding those weapons are all dead. If Ukraine mounted a longer term defense, Donald Trump would be extending the war in Ukraine. Donald Trump would also be saying like, "Oh, I want to do a peace deal with Vladimir Putin, but he's not listening or whatever. Vladimir Putin is not playing ball." And they would continue along. Maybe the messaging would be a little different. Didn't you just say a bit ago that all wars are ended through treaty? Now you just said this would inevitably end on the battlefield. No, the terms of the treaty will be dictated by what is happening on the battlefield. But yes, all wars do end with treaties. This is a treaty that will happen at the end of this war as well. But who has leverage and how much more war can be fought is still dictated on the battlefield. Ukraine can still fight. Trump is just pulling the rug from under them. I don't know if there's enough appetite for Ukraine to continue fighting as well.
Safeguarding European security must be an imperative for European members of NATO. As part of this, Europe must provide the overwhelming share of future lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Members of this contact group must meet the moment. This means donating more ammunition and equipment, leveraging comparative advantages, expanding your defense industrial base, and importantly, leveling with your citizens about the threat facing Europe. Part of this is speaking frankly with your people about how this threat can only be met by spending more on defense. 2% is not enough. President Trump has...
Lol, they're backstabbing the euro, saying that the U.S. is done with war but keeping oil sanctions on Russia. Yeah, they're also forcing the Baltic states to move into an energy grid away from Russia, and all the natural gas that they are supposed to be getting from Russia, they shouldn't get from Russia, but they should get from us. This way, we get to make more money. How is that not driving Europe into the arms of China? I mean, we'll see what happens with EU moving into the arms of China. I think Donald Trump is doing a lot of stuff that if you're a competent head of state, you probably would look to China as an alternative. But I think that at least a healthy amount of European white supremacy plays an active role in them never actually trusting China at all. So I doubt that they will find themselves in the throes of Chinese soft power.
It will require our European allies to step into the arena and take ownership of conventional security on the continent. The United States remains committed to the NATO alliance and to the defense partnership with Europe. Full stop. But the United States will no longer tolerate an
I would say, did the United States actually succeed in crippling Russia through Ukraine? No. But the United States is the one that actually benefited the most from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, significantly more than Russia did. The ones that lost the most are Ukrainians, and the ones that lost the second most are Europeans in this process. EU is getting shellacked from both ends. They have to pay more for their energy. They have to get it from America. America is adding additional commitments, and you got a madman like Donald Trump basically using the European Union like a cum sock. The ones that are getting shellacked here harder are definitely Europe. Russia lost more than gained too, you bricking up. I think Russia lost a lot as well, certainly. Make no mistake. That's why I'm saying America won in this process. Russia also lost access to the European marketplace for energy, even though it probably pushed, especially with the Israel stuff, I think it probably pushed a lot of the global South nations further into Chinese and I guess in some instances Russian partnerships. But overall, the ones that made out the best in this process is the United States of America. Europe is headed down a very scary path right now. And I think a lot of the commitments to maintaining neoliberalism in a lot of the important EU nations is causing them even more harm, where many people laugh about Viktor Orban and Hungary. A lot of EU leaders look at Viktor Orban and say, oh, that's just one guy. He's just like different. Except I think a lot of Western European nations are going to be reflecting Hungarian style politics fairly soon. The EU, would you say the EU is in worse shape than the US? I mean, the EU is definitely worse shape than the US. Yeah, every European Union country has their own version of Viktor Orban, and you're seeing more and more Viktor Orbans pop up everywhere. Respectfully, this is one of your worst takes to date. Really? You don't see the rise of far-right movements, like openly, actively fascist movements in every European Union country? EU frogs, I love you all. And I told you many years ago when you'd come in and laugh at America not having any social safety nets, I told you that you are looking at your future. You are basically laughing at all of the stupid shit that we argue about here in America. You will argue about inevitably. The self-inflicted austerity in European countries was a self-inflicted wound that started a long time ago. It's not new. It's just finally getting to a point where people are sick and tired of the eviscerated social safety nets and are lashing out at whatever target they can in a very American fashion. And those targets are Muslims. Those targets are whoever they think is the real enemy. It's never austerity. Meanwhile, in that process, as everyone is too busy fighting against immigrants and fighting against like Muslim refugees or whatever, the people in positions of power are maintaining their austerity regimes and simultaneously privatizing key sectors. You understand EU politics. EU libs are a little more left, so they watch your stream, but they're still libs. No, I know. Also, my biggest haters are European Social Democrats that love NATO. These are the guys that at least are like, you know what? I don't agree with him on NATO stuff, but overall, I still kind of agree with him, especially when he's ripping into America's lack of social safety nets. Look at French politics. Look at even German politics with the AfD in Germany. Italy already has Meloni. The right, the fascist right, is growing. After many, many years of center-right dominance and neoliberal dominance and all the austerity that came alongside that, I think that it is inevitable. I mean, make no mistake, there's plenty of Democrats who also say, I'm a fabulist. There's plenty of Democrats in the United States of America that fancy themselves to be progressive and simultaneously still talk about how the Democrats shouldn't be doing more. What do you mean? What's your expectation, Hasan? So there's, of course, going to be plenty of people who consider themselves to be leftists in Europe and in European countries who also feel that way in a similar vein.